So the Sheikh, he taught us to prioritize certain things. Amongst them is the matter of the creed, the belief, to learn about the belief and to teach it to the people, the right belief, the right Islamic belief. That's broad word there. The right belief is broad term. So Sheikh taught us to give this priority over other things. And he taught us to give priority to the obligatory knowledge over other things. And amongst what he taught us to prioritize is bidding the good and forbidding the evil. Something that he talks about a lot in different books of his. In the summary of obligatory knowledge, the Sheikh has some words there for us. He told us that every accountable person is obligated to perform everything that Allah made obligatory upon him. He's obligated to do, to perform everything that Allah Ta'ala mandated of him, and to avoid everything that Allah made obligatory to avoid. Uh, yes, so what we learned is that a person, his obligation from his Lord is summed up into doing everything that God commanded you to do and avoiding everything God commanded you to avoid. Yes. And there's, for one thing, an important rule for you to know. I feel like we were saying this last week. Maybe because I was tired last week. I'm not remembering very well. Important rule to know, which is that the religious rules pertain to men and women, unless there's a proof to specify a rule to one gender or the other. So originally and fundamentally, a rule is for men and women, not just for men, not just for women. Unless there is something that proves that a rule is just for the men or just for the women. So an example of something that's just for the men is the obligation of going to Jumu'ah. And an example of something that's just for the women is the obligation of covering the hair in public, yani in the presence of marriageable men, in the presence of marriageable men. That's what I meant by public. In the presence of marriageable men, she has to cover her hair. Uh, but if there is no proof to show that the rule is for one gender or the other, then the rule is going to be for both genders. Even if the proof is mentioning only one of the two genders, even if the proof is mentioning one of the two genders. So what does that mean? It means, for example, what's the judgment of playing the doof, the tambourine? So we say it's permissible. So someone might say, what's your proof? So then we can produce so many hadiths in which girls were playing the doof. Girls were playing tambourines and singing. Numerous ones, authentic hadiths. And the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't stop it. Had it been forbidden, he would have stopped it. He knew about it and he didn't say anything as far as stopping it. If anything, he encouraged them. So what someone might say, this is only for the women though. He would say, don't you see in all these hadiths, these are just women? Do you have a hadith about the men playing doof? So if we say, personally, I don't know any hadith about men playing tambourine. I don't know a hadith like that. All the hadiths I know about this, the women are playing the tambourine. So someone might say, so therefore, this is for the women only. So the answer to him is, no, it's not. You didn't find any proof to say this only for the women. He would say, yes, in the hadith, all those hadiths are about women. So the answer is no, it's not about women. It just happens that these are women in the stories in these hadiths. Just so happens that in these hadiths, there's always women playing the tambourine. But doesn't say in any single one of them that men can't play the tambourine. It's proving that you can play the tambourine. These hadiths definitely prove that the tambourine's not haram, or else the women wouldn't have been allowed to play them. And they don't prove that it's only permissible for women because nothing in there says, as for the men, they can't play. And we would say to that person, you're trying to use the fact that there's only women in these hadiths to prove that it's only for women. So we say this is wrong on your part because the religious rules are for men and women, not just for men or just for women. The only time it's going to be only for men or only for women is if there's a proof. There's no proof in the fact that these stories only contain women, that the rule is only for the women. You're going to actually need the prophet to say, this is only for the women, for example, or something that proves that. I'll give you another example. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he damned the female tattoo artist. The female tattoo artist and the female who wants the tattoo, who gets it, that is. He damns the female tattoo artist and the female who gets a tattoo. So, for example, we could say to that same person in our previous scenario, look at this hadith. Do you want to say that tattooing is only haram for women? It's not haram for men, since it just only mentions women in this hadith? Now, he definitely is not going to say, that's right. Now, he's going to have to say, yeah, this is haram for men and women. That's true. So, we're going to say to him, it's only, the Prophet only said here that God damn the female tattoo artist and the female who gets the tattoo. Why don't you restrict it here? So he won't have any reason. So then therefore, it's like we said, the rules are for men and women. What's halal and what's haram and what's obligatory is for men and women. Unless there's a proof to specify it to the man or to the woman. Well, a sin is going to still be a sin even if a person doesn't know that it's a sin. But, yeah. Mhm. But sometimes the tattoo, the najasa of the tattoo, the filthiness of the tattoo is going to be excused because the person didn't know it was haram. Not that he didn't fall into haram, but the filthiness of the tattoo because the needle raises the blood and then the blood mixes or contacts the ink. So the ink becomes contaminated and then just sits on the body. So now that spot is najasa. But there's some cases when the person's going to be excused from the filthiness of the tattoo, like if he didn't know it was haram, or like when he got it, he was a kafir, or some other cases. But it doesn't mean he's not sinful for actually getting the tattoo. You wanted to say something? Unless he has an excuse. If he doesn't go to Jumu'ah, he's sinful unless he has an excuse. Because Jumu'ah, yes, it is a major sin. Because Jumu'ah is a personal obligation on the unexcused males. Personal obligation on the unexcused males. That means For some men to do Jumu'ah will not drop the obligation from other men. So when some men do the Jumu'ah, other men still have to go to Jumu'ah too. They can't say, oh, there's already people there. That's enough. It's a personal obligation on the men, as opposed to praying the 5 prayers in congregation, other than Friday prayer. The 5 prayers in congregation, praying them in congregation is what? A communal obligation. Each one of the 5 prayers, there needs to be some Muslim men who perform the congregation of the 5 prayers in the place of congregation at the masjid or musalla. If some of them do it, the rest are excused. That's when a person can say, all right, now it's Dhuhr time and I'm at work. Oh, the brothers, they're praying Dhuhr in Jama'ah at the masjid now. Okay, I don't have to go. It's a communal obligation. They're taking care of it. There's already brothers doing it. I don't have to go because it's not a personal obligation, it's a communal obligation. Now, so we are saying that, and we're under the topic of bidding the good and forbidding the evil. And we are saying that there's a general rule that pertains to men and women. That general rule is that you have to do everything Allah made obligatory and avoid everything He made forbidden. Now, when one wants to fulfill some deed, then you need to know that deed is going to either be a worship or a deal. All of what you want to do is going to boil down to a worship or a dealing. Worship means you're going to want to pray or fast or make hajj or pay zakat. And a deal means you want to sell or buy, excuse me, want to sell or buy or get married. Uh, or when I say sale, it might be, for example, you want to support your wife. That's obligatory. So to do so, you purchase clothing. So that's a sale. And you're doing this sale for the sake of an obligation or for your um, prepubescent children who don't have their own money. It's obligatory to support them. So uh, in the process of that, you're going to sell, or you're going to buy, or you're going to rent for one reason or another. Uh, then this you're doing some obligation now, some worship or some deal. So then there's 3 things you always have to be mindful of. One is the integrals of this worship or deal. The integrals of this worship or this deal. 2, the conditions of this worship or deal. And 3, the invalidators of this worship or deal. So these 3 things is very important to keep them in mind. So that before you do anything, you just pull up your mental checklist. Integrals, fulfilled, check. Conditions, fulfilled, check. Invalidators, avoided, check. For any deal or any worship. Now, how are you going to know what these conditions and integrals and invalidators are? You can't just know from yourself. It's not a matter of what you feel. So that's going to then be by learning the matters of your religion. So one of the obligations is actually for a person to take out time from his life and learn about his religion. So that He can learn the right belief, learn about blasphemy and then avoid it, and then learn about the obligations and learn about the sins and learn about their details, learn about their integrals and their conditions and their invalidators. What are the integrals? The integrals are the actual components of the deed, this worship or this deal. For example, Yani, the integrals are what actually make up the act. So, for example, the integrals of the prayer are making an intention, saying Allahu Akbar, standing if it's an obligatory prayer, reciting Al Fatiha, bowing, standing back up, prostrating twice, sitting between the two prostrations, sitting to end the prayer, reciting the tashahhud, and praying for the Prophet and saying Assalamu alaikum. Those are the integrals of the prayer. I didn't say anything in there about wudu. I didn't say anything in there about facing the Qibla. Those are not actually integrals of the prayer. The integrals of the prayer are the actual parts that make the prayer itself, that make up the prayer, that form the prayer. Well, I'll give you another example. When it comes to a marriage, what are the actual integrals of the marriage? The actual integrals of the marriage are the man, the groom, the bride, the guardian who gives the bride away, the witnesses who see the deal between the groom and the guardian. They see the words exchanged between the groom and the guardian and the actual words. That's the integrals of the marriage. If any one of those is missing, it's not even a marriage. Like if there's two men, for example, where's the woman? Or two women, where's the man? Then this is not even valid marriage. Uh, so those are the integrals of the deed. And the conditions of a deed, if you want, you can use another word, the prerequisites. The prerequisites of a deed are the things that you need to do before you do the deed, or they need to be fulfilled before you do the deed. And they have to last throughout the deed. So, for example, wudu. Before you pray, you have to have wudu. You have to have made wudu before you pray. And you have to keep your wudu while you pray. You can't break your wudu in your prayer. So then this kind of thing is called condition or prerequisite. Something that's not an actual integral of the prayer. It's something that needs to be fulfilled before you pray, and it needs to last throughout your prayer. So, for example, facing the Qibla. It's not an integral of the prayer because you have to actually face the Qibla before you even start praying. Just the fact that you're not praying yet, you're facing the Qibla, but you're not praying yet, then that means that the Qibla is not an integral. Because the integral is something that is actually a part of the prayer. So when it comes to the example of the marriage, uh, a condition for the marriage is that the man doesn't already have four wives. Or a condition is that the woman's not already married. Or, for example, a condition for the marriage is that if that's a Muslim man, that the woman has to be a Muslima or a Jew or a Christian. And if the bride is a Muslima, then the groom has to be a Muslim only. These are conditions. They need to be fulfilled before the actual marriage. Uh, so that's the meaning of learning about the integrals of a deed. The integrals are the actual components of a deed. And the conditions are not components of the deed, they are prerequisites of the deed. And you're not going to know those integrals and conditions without learning. And then the third thing is uh, knowing the invalidators of the deed. Or let me give you another example, a slaughter, the slaughter of an animal. What are the integrals of the slaughter? The integrals are going to be a slaughterer, a human, and a slaughtered animal, an animal to slaughter. So the animal, that's an integral. And a cutting tool, even if it were a wire, you might have a wire, you can use it like a blade to cut into the throat. So a cutting tool and an actual act of cutting the throat, those are the integrals of the slaughter. What about the conditions? Conditions are such as, for example, the one who's doing the slaughter is a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew. Or the also another condition is that what you're slaughtering is something we're allowed to eat. So it can't be a pig, for example. Or it can't be a wolf, and etc. So those are the differences, or that's the difference between integral and a condition. And one must avoid the invalidators of any deed, be that deed a worship or a deal. And then, so one's going to learn what those invalidators are for each thing. So, for example, for the prayer, talking normal, worldly speech is an invalidator, but not when it comes to circling the Kaaba. If you were circling the Kaaba, it's permissible for you to talk. So how come you can talk while you circle the Kaaba and you can't talk while you pray? Because those are two different worships, and it's not our business to make up those worships. Rather, our business is to learn what came in the religion concerning those worships, so that we can know that if you're in the prayer and you talk, your prayer is invalidated. And when you're circling the Kaaba and you're with your family or whoever you're making the Hajj with or the Umrah with, you can talk to that one. It's not even haram. It's not it's not a bad thing. And for example, praying. We'll use the example of prayer again. In the prayer, if you said in your heart while you prayed, I now intend to interrupt my prayer. So this intention, it interrupts your prayer. Your prayer is invalidated now because you intended to stop praying. But if you were fasting in the daytime of Ramadan, and then you said, I now intend to stop fasting, but you didn't eat anything, and you didn't do anything that breaks a fast. You didn't eat anything, you didn't have a sexual intercourse, you didn't intentionally vomit, you didn't do anything else that breaks the fast. Then, if you said, now I intend to interrupt my fast, this will not invalidate your fast. Your fast is still valid. Because there's a difference between the fast and the prayer. They don't have the same judgment here. So how are you going to know the invalidators of one? And how are you going to know the invalidators of the other? How are you going to know that the invalidator of one is not an invalidator of the other? By learning the matters of your religion. So when you learn that, then you're going to do your obligations and avoid the haram. To do your obligations, you need to satisfy their integrals and their conditions and avoid their invalidators. Then, if you fulfill the integrals and the conditions and you avoided the invalidators, then your deed is what? Valid. What does that mean? What does it mean to say the deed is valid? That means that your deed is now hereby recognized by the religious law. Recognized by the religious law? Yes. What does that mean? That means that the goal of your deed is achieved. Goal of my deed is achieved. What's that? What's the goal of my deed? What does that mean? So then you need to look at each deed, and you're going to see what's the goal of your prayer. When you pray, what's the goal here? The goal is to get out of an obligation, meaning there's an obligation on you. You want that obligation to not be on you anymore. So then you need to do something to fulfill this goal. What you're going to do to fulfill this goal, you're going to go make wudu and any other purification you need, and you're going to put on some clothes, whatever is that, and you're going to face the direction. So right there, that means you're fulfilling conditions. Then you're going to say Allahu Akbar with an intention, and then start doing some particular actions. That means you're fulfilling the integrals. And in the process of that, not doing anything that invalidates it until you do all of those conditions and integrals. Until you finally say Assalamu alaikum to end your prayer. Then now that obligation is no longer applicable to you, meaning you did it. It was applicable for you to do it, and then you did it, and now that you did it, you don't have to do it again. You don't have to do that one anymore. Rather, you're going to just have to do the next prayer when it comes in. But this one you just did, you don't have to do it anymore because you did it. So that was your achieving the goal. Your goal was to get out of that obligation. If you don't fulfill the integrals, or you don't fulfill the conditions, or you commit an invalidator, you will not have gotten out of that obligation. And you still need to do it. So then your goal is not achieved. That's if it were a worship. That's your goal if it's a worship. Perform your prayer so that you don't have to do it anymore. Fast, perform your fast so that you don't have to do it anymore. Pay your zakat, perform your hajj so that you don't have to do it anymore. Yani, until the next time, that is. Hajj is only once in a lifetime, but the other ones, they come back again. Do it now, and then you don't have to do this one anymore, not until the next one comes back around. So that's what it means. You're achieving your goal of getting out of the obligation each time. And uh, Yani, it's just like paying a debt. You owe some money, then okay, that's an obligation. So what you're gonna do, you're gonna get that money and go to the person you owe and give it to them. Once you did that, then you don't have to do it anymore. This is done now. So your goal is achieved. Now you got out of this duty. Uh, and when it comes to deals, there's another goal. When it comes to a deal, there's another goal, not just the goal of getting out of something, not having a duty, not just the goal of not having a duty anymore when it comes to a deal. Rather, your goal when it comes to a deal is the realization of whatever that deal is for. Meaning, what is the point of a sale? For example, the point of a sale is to gain ownership of something that wasn't previously yours. You can't just take it. So you can gain ownership in different ways. He's not giving it to you as a gift, so that one's not going to work. You don't inherit from him, and he's not dead. You're not going to get it as an inheritance. You can't just steal it. So then, how are you going to get it? By purchasing it. So then, you fulfill the conditions and the integrals of the purchase, and you avoid any invalidators of the purchase. Then the goal of the purchase will be fulfilled, which means the thing became yours. And whatever you paid for it becomes the ownership of the other one. So the goal is fulfilled now. That means it's valid. Or the marriage contract, what's the goal of the marriage contract? The goal of the marriage contract is to legalize intimacy. Yeah. So if you fulfill the integrals of this marriage contract and the conditions of this marriage contract, then the goal is fulfilled. What's the goal? The goal is to legalize intimacy. Once you did the marriage contract, then this woman is lawful for you. So then it's valid. So that's what you want to do. You want to do valid worships and valid deals. Do the valid worships so that you get out of the duty of having to do it until the next one comes around. And do valid deals so that you realize the point of the deal so that you can reap the benefit of the deal. Because if your sale is not valid, you're going to have to take the thing back. If your marriage is not valid, you're going to have to refrain from the woman. Now, if someone sees another person not doing an obligation correctly, he sees someone doing an obligation incorrectly, then he has to uh, make him do it correctly if he's able to. He has to make him do it correctly if he's able to. Compel him. He has to compel him to do it correctly if he's able to. If he can't compel him, then he tells him. He has to tell him to do it correctly if he's able to. If he can't tell him to do it correctly, why can't he tell him? Because it's going to lead to something worse. Then he'll just hate it in his heart that he's doing it wrongly. And that's because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyirhu biyadihi." Any one of you who saw something objectionable, then let him alter it with his hand. فَإِن لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِلِسَانِهِ. And if he is unable to alter it with his hand, then with his tongue. فَإِن لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِقَلْبِهِ. And if he is unable to alter it with his tongue, then he hates it in his heart. وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ. That's the weakest of faith. That's the least of faith. That's the least that the faithful one will do. If you have faith and you see something objectionable and you can't compel its change and you cannot verbally insist on its change, then you will hate this in your heart because you're a believer. You, man. Yeah, no. As a believer, you're going to say, A'udhu billah, that's haram. I hate that in my heart. So one is obligated to do all of his obligations. And what about somebody else? If he sees somebody else doing them wrongly, he's obligated to compel the change of that. If he can, or else he has to hate it in his heart. And one is obligated to avoid all of the sins. And likewise, he's obligated to stop anyone else from the sins, to compel someone else to stop sinning if he's able to compel him. If he can't compel him to stop sinning, then he demands of him to stop sinning. Yani, I'm saying demand of him. He's going to talk to him some way. His talking to him might not be forceful. Rather, his talking to him might be tactful. Because really, you want to get to your goal. The goal is that this haram stops. So whether that's going to stop because you're imposing, because if you're imposing authority and if you're saying, no, as long as I'm here, that's not happening. Okay, that's one way, that's fine. Or it might be it's going to stop because you were smooth and tactful and you politicked. You said, no, come on, no, do it like this. No, come on, no, bang, 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 bang. Okay, all right, now the haram is stopped. Fine, as long as it's stopped. And if you can't uh, verbally stop that haram, then you have to hate it in your heart. And so, what is haram? Haram is something that Allah threatened its committer with punishment. The haram is something that if you do it, you deserve to be punished. And if you don't do it, you deserve reward. If you don't do haram, you deserve reward. But really, there's a detail there. Because you're not going to deserve reward for not doing something haram unless you make an intention. Because, like right now, we're not doing something haram. So that doesn't mean deserve reward. Meaning, like right now, I'm not drinking a bottle of wine. You're not drinking a bottle of wine. So do we deserve reward for not drinking a bottle of wine? There's no reward for us here. We're just not doing something. When do you really deserve the reward for not doing something haram? When you correct your intention. So, for example, you have the opportunity to do something haram, and then you feared your Lord at that time by Allah's mercy. He enabled you to have strength not to do it. And you said, lad, this is haram. I'm not going to do it. Because that's disobedience to my Lord. So just that right there, once you took that position within yourself, that is correcting your intention. That's the same as correcting your intention. When you said within yourself, this is haram, Allah forbade it, so I'm not going to do it, that is in itself correcting your intention to avoid the haram. Or it might be that you said, that's haram. Let me correct my intention and not do it. Then that's correcting your intention. So when you correct your intention to avoid the haram, that's when you deserve the reward. It's not only that you're not doing it that you deserve reward, because you just got not doing it means you're just not doing something. I think what I'm saying to you is clear. If you have a question, go ahead. And so, okay. And so that's the definition of haram. Then what's the definition of obligation? The obligation is something that if you do it, you deserve reward. If you don't do it, you deserve punishment. And same thing here. This reward for doing an obligation. We're saying it inside the definition of obligation. We're saying obligation is defined as something, if you do it, you deserve reward. If you don't do it, you deserve punishment. Here, also, you need an intention. But there's a detail, because there's a difference between a worship and a deal. Sometimes a worship is an obligation, and sometimes a deal is an obligation. When you do the worship as an obligation, you have to have an intention just to even make the worship valid. So you're not going to even be praying without an intention or fasting or the like. You will not even engage in that worship and initiate that worship without the intention. Uh, but when it comes to a deal, it's possible to do the deal without an intention and you're still fulfilling your obligation. So if your obligation is to support your wife, and so you went to the store to buy clothing for her, if you forgot to make an intention, then it's still a valid sale when you bought the clothing. And then you took the clothing to her and you still forgot to correct your intention and you gave it to her and said, here's your clothing that you deserve. And you forgot in your heart to say, I'm giving you this for the sake of Allah. I'm giving this for the sake of Allah. You forgot the intention. It's still valid. It's going to be counted that you did support your wife, even if you didn't intend at that time, because this is a type of deal here. And in this case, since it's a deal, then without your intention, it's still valid and your obligation is still fulfilled. And you don't get reward, though, without an intention. You're not deserving reward without the intention, but you still can fulfill the obligation if it's a deal if you don't make an intention. So that obligatory to do and obligatory to avoid, that's your minimum obligation. If you do this minimum obligation, then you are a God-fearing person. That's enough to be considered God-fearing person. Not a saint, though. It's not enough to be a saint. Doing the obligation and avoiding the sin consistently all the time, never leaving out the obligation and never falling into the sin, that itself is not enough to make you a saint, even though that's still a high status. There's still three other judgments. There's the recommendation. The recommendation is something, if you do it, you deserve reward. If you don't do it, there's no punishment. If you want to become a saint, you need to engage in the recommendation. To become a saint, yeah, if you want to suffice with being God fearing, just do your obligations and avoid the haram. But if you want to become a saint, then you need to add some recommendation, something you don't have to do, but it's rewardable to do, and then do it consistently. Never leave it out. Like certain sunnah prayers you might do, or a certain fasting habit you might have, or a certain charity that you give. Always. And you stay like that until you become a saint. And another judgment is what's disliked. This is what, if you do it, there is no punishment. But if you avoid it, there's reward. Like eating with your left hand, avoid that with a good intention, and that's rewardable. And then there's the indifferent, it's not rewardable or punishable, whether you do it or you don't do it, like standing up or sitting down. So those are all your five judgments. And I already told you what valid means and what invalid means. What valid means, the valid is something that fulfills the integrals and conditions. Valid means what fulfills the integrals and conditions. And therefore it's recognized. Valid means recognized by the religious law. And invalid is something missing an integral or a condition. The invalid is what misses an integral or a condition, and therefore it's not recognized. Invalid means not recognized by religious law. And that's the end of this section. Now the Sheikh goes on to a whole new book, which is the Book of Purification and Prayers.